This is Eastern Kentucky, an area that is rich in natural resources like crude oil and natural gas, and some of the largest coal reserves in the nation. It was also the childhood home for many country music stars who were born and raised in Eastern Kentucky before moving on to share their music with the rest of the world. Religious diversity in Eastern Kentucky has increased significantly over the past several decades. There's the Methodist, the Baptist, the non-denominational, the Catholics, the Mormons, and even a mosque. But none of these is unique as the old regular Baptist. The use of the name regular has persisted among some Baptist groups, particularly among primitivistic sects that reject modern methods, including missionary and educational auxiliaries for the churches. Most old regular Baptists can be traced back to the New Salem Association of the United Baptists, originating in Eastern Kentucky in 1825. We will be hearing commentary from some of those who were born and raised Old Regular Baptist.
Church, and I was interested a little bit in the history of how Old Regular Baptist came about. And one of the reasons that I was interested in that was some of my ancestors were some of the first people to come to Letcher County, and that was the result of them being given a piece of land for their service during the Revolutionary War. And so when they came to East Kentucky, they weren't Old Regular Baptists. That really didn't exist at the time. But it was introduced by some of these traveling preachers, and there was one in particular out of Tennessee that kind of brought it up to East Kentucky. And then, so one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, some great-great-great level, I don't know, 1, 2, or 3, what it was, but became a real important preacher in the Old Regular Baptist religion. But one of the things that I thought was funny about that was how it has continued to evolve in periods of time.
What was it like growing up Old Regular Baptist?
Well, it was different. You know, it was hard. My mom was real strict, you know, about her beliefs and everything. I didn't wear pants, you know, so I wasn't allowed to. She never did wear pants either.
Right.
Neither did my grandmother or aunts, you know. They were all Old Regular and grown up that way, you know.
As a young girl, were you able to cut your hair? Or?
I did when I was, you know, when I was probably about in the 5th grade. I got my haircut because my aunt was a beautician. And she cut it because it was, you know, so long and thick, and Mom got tired of fooling with it. But I wasn't in the church, you know. And, I mean, I didn't belong. I wasn't a member. Kids didn't. Kids wasn't members of the Old Regular Baptist Church. They didn't encourage that. Well, there was no Sunday school or anything. You just went with your parents because, you know, probably there was nobody to keep you, you know.
Later on, as I grew a little bit older, one of the things I discovered was that Old Regular Baptists don't have a whole lot of instruction and interaction with the children. And so I had asked about that with some of my family one time. And their thoughts on that was that children weren't able to make that decision, that they hadn't developed to the point where they would make that decision. So Old Regular Baptists don't have, or didn't at the time, and I think probably still not very many do have something like Sunday school for the children. Or so when they went to church, everybody just went to church together. Children were right there with all the adults and so forth, but they weren't expected to be active members of the church as some other churches would baptize children when they're born. Old Regular Baptists didn't believe in that, so that was kind of.
Running water baptisms done in the creeks and rivers are an integral part of the Old Regular religion.
They baptized in it, and even though in the summer months, when there wasn't much water in the creek, I remember this one guy, which was sort of he was pretty good size, fella, and they went and dug out a hole in the creek, to get enough water to baptize him. And of course, they all gathered around, on the creek bank and sang songs and even in the winter, people that was buried in the winter, I have known them to break the ice,
Memories about
for them
the
to
church was
baptize.
Everybody ganging up on the creek bank, and there'd be a little hole of water there just big enough to get into sometimes, and they might dam it up a little bit, and then so they would go out and do a baptism. And the Old Regular Baptists, the Baptists came from John the Baptist, who believed in this immersion in water, and I can remember discussions among some of those folks about what baptism really meant, and they believed in full submersion. You had to go into the water and be totally submerged in order to have had a real baptism. And I can remember the Old Regular Baptists being very disdainful of other people who didn't do this full thing, and even some of them believed. A lot of times, some of the churches that even did full baptism would have tanks and stuff inside tanks of water inside the church where they did that. But the Old Regular Baptists, that I knew, you went to the creek or the river, and that was an interesting thing to watch too, because there was a lot of emotion that surrounded that activity. And I remember I was pretty young and just barely can remember when my grandmother was baptized. My grandfather was Old Regular Baptist, went to church stuff, but he was never baptized, and he wouldn't have it. He wouldn't go that far, so that may have allowed me some leeway. I don't know. He never went the whole way.
And it was sitting on a little table over from the, from where the preacher stood. Over here was a little table with the bucket and the dipper in it, and everybody drank out of it. And that was another one of my questions. Mom, why is everybody drinking out of that bucket? And after they'd preach and you'd see saliva, running down their chin and everything, and then they go over and get a drink of that water, and in a few minutes somebody else go over and get another drink, and they all drink out of the same bucket. My dad